The city outside his windows had finally gone quiet. Market stalls were dark. Lanterns were out. The last footsteps had faded into distant alleys. High above the sleeping streets, in an office lined with polished wood and glittering trophies, Amir stood alone with a single object in front of him, an ornate treasure chest. Gold leaf curled around its corners. Jewels studded its lid. Iron bands wrapped it tight like a promise that nothing inside would ever escape. He took a breath and dragged it onto the center of his desk. His shoulders dipped with the effort. It should have been heavy. Once it had been. With hands that no longer trembled from hard work, only from age, he lifted the lid. Inside, nothing had changed. Coins lay in little mountains, catching the light in 100 tiny flashes. Jewels nestled in velvet pockets, sparkling like captured stars. Rolled deeds and contracts, stamped and sealed, sat in orderly rows along one side. It was everything he had spent his life chasing. Yet as he stared down into that full chest, a strange thought rose in his mind. "It's lighter," he whispered to himself. Not in weight, he knew it still took strength to carry. Lighter in something else. Lighter in meaning. Lighter in what it did for him. There was a time when opening this chest had made his heart race. Now, it only reminded him of how quiet the rest of the room sounded. He closed the lid gently, the metal lock clinking shut. He had everything he ever said he wanted. So why did it feel like, somewhere along the way, he had lost almost everything that mattered? Long before the ornate chest in the polished office, there was a boy with dust on his feet and hunger in his eyes. The market then was the same maze of color and noise it had always been. Vendors called out their prices, fabrics waved like flags, spices painted the air with warm, sharp scents. Amir, barely more than a child, moved through the crowd carrying a small basket of dates his father had given him to sell. He watched how people moved differently around certain stalls. Some merchants stood on raised platforms, draped in fine robes, their tables piled high with goods. Customers bowed their heads slightly when they spoke to them, their voices more careful, more respectful. Those men laughed loudly. They never looked over their shoulders. They never counted their coins twice. Amir's own stall was just a cloth on the ground, with a few tired fruits and a wooden crate for a seat. People walked past him quickly, eyes sliding away. One day, as he sat there with his unsold dates and a growl in his stomach, an older vendor from a nearby spice stall approached. The man had kind eyes and hands stained with turmeric and saffron. He knelt beside Amir and bought a handful of dates, even though they were not the freshest.
"Business slow?"
the man asked, dropping extra coins into Amir's palm. Amir nodded, closing his fingers tightly around the money.
"Don't worry,"
the vendor said.
"True wealth is what you can give away, not what you hide in a box."
Amir forced a polite smile, but the words slid off him like dust in the wind. It was easy for a man with a full stall to talk about giving things away. Amir had nothing. He was tired of feeling small. That night, he emptied his tiny earnings onto his sleeping mat. 3 coins. Not enough to change a life, but more than he'd had that morning. He found an old wooden box under his bed, wiped it clean, and placed the coins inside like they were rare jewels. As he closed the lid, something new settled in his chest. Not peace, not joy, but a sharp, bright promise.
"One day,
He whispered.
this box will be full. And when it is, no one will ever look past me again."
Years passed, and Amir learned quickly. He watched how the bigger merchants spoke, how they set their prices, how they smiled with their mouths, but not their eyes. He learned which goods were in season, which traders were desperate, which customers would pay more if you flattered them first. His small cloth stall became a wooden cart. The cart became a proper stand with a roof. The stand turned into a shop. Every extra coin, every bit of profit above survival, went into that box under his bed. When it overflowed, he bought a larger one, and when that one started to fill, he upgraded it again. His home changed too. He moved from a single dim room to a small house. He married. His spouse would sometimes stand in the doorway as he counted coins late into the night, a question in their eyes.
"Come to bed.
They'd say gently.
You've done enough for today."
"Enough?"
He'd reply, pen scratching in his ledger.
"If I stop now, we stay where we are. If I keep going, we move forward. I'm doing this for us."
They would sigh and leave him to his numbers. When a child was born, he held the tiny bundle in his arms for a moment, awkward and amazed. Then a customer knocked at the door, and he passed the baby back, promising, "I'll be back early tonight." He wasn't. In the market, other merchants began to whisper his name with a mixture of respect and caution.
Amir will buy you out if you're not careful. Don't try to cheat him. He'll find it on the page before you finished your sentence.
He was known as fair in his weights, but ruthless in his deals. He paid on time. He demanded the same. At home, birthdays were celebrated with gifts bought by his money, but chosen by someone else. At work, employees learned to speak to him only of sales, never of their own lives. As the years turned, his little boxes finally seemed too small, so he commissioned a chest, then another, each one more ornate than the last, each one a monument to what he believed was progress. The boy who had once hidden 3 coins under his bed now sat in a house that could hold 100 such boxes. But somehow, the more chests he filled, the less space there seemed to be for anything else. Amir never stopped counting. Every morning began with numbers. Every evening ended with them. He traced the lines of his ledgers with a practiced finger, watching profits climb neatly across the page. His shops had spread beyond the first market, branching into other streets, other towns. Men and women worked under his name in places he rarely visited, all of them sending their totals back to his desk. Merchants who had once ignored him now greeted him with deep nods. Officials invited him to dinners. His opinions were suddenly valuable. In public, he smiled easily. He wore fine clothes, his hands softening without heavy lifting. He seemed to have everything. In private, the house grew quieter. His spouse began to set 1 plate less at dinner, then stopped setting his at all, leaving his food covered on the stove instead. Sometimes, when he came home late, he found cold meals waiting and a dark hallway. His child, once eager to show him drawings and tell him stories from school, now spent more time behind a closed door.
Did you see the play?
His spouse asked one evening, hope flickering.
The one our child worked on for weeks?
He looked up from his ledger, genuinely confused.
When was it?
Tonight.
They said softly.
You said you'd try to come.
He glanced at the clock, at the contract still unsigned, at the chest partially open in the corner.
The deal took longer than I expected.
He answered.
I'll make it up to them. I'll bring something special tomorrow.
His spouse gave him a long look that felt more tired than angry.
They don't need something special.
They said.
They needed you in the seat you left empty.
He turned back to his papers, telling himself he'd remember that, telling himself there would be time later to fix it. Later always seemed to move one step further away. The offer came on a bright morning, the kind that made the market feel almost joyful. A rival merchant, one who had once mocked Amir's small stall, sat across from him now, older, smaller, his hands twisting nervously as he spoke.
My sons don't want this business,
the man admitted.
Times have changed. I can't keep up. I know if I don't sell, I'll lose everything.
Amir listened, calm and quiet. The man slid a folded contract across the table.
You're the only one I trust to buy it,
he said.
You're fair, you pay, you know this market.
Amir's eyes scanned the lines. The price was low, too low, some would say, but the man had written it himself, desperate to escape ruin. Amir could raise it. He could suggest a fairer number, or he could sign and gain another corner of the city for almost nothing. As he weighed the paper in his hand, his assistant knocked gently on the office door.
Sir,
they said.
Your spouse called. It's about your child.
They paused.
Today is important to them. They hoped you'd be there.
Tell them I'm in a meeting,
Amir replied, eyes still on the contract.
I'll come as soon as I can.
He heard his spouse's voice faintly through the receiver on his assistant's desk, disappointment traveling even through old wires.
We saved you a seat,
they said.
Front row.
Amir's grip tightened on the pen. He looked at the contract again, at the signatures already waiting for his line, at the space on the page where his name would mean control over yet another business, another slice of the city.
This will secure everything,
he told himself.
After this, I'll slow down. After this, I'll have time.
The pen pressed to the paper. Outside, in a school auditorium or small hall across town, a child scanned the crowd from the edge of a stage, searching for a familiar face that never appeared. By the time Amir placed the pen down and shook the other merchant's hand, the applause for an empty seat had already finished. He walked away from the meeting with another victory. He didn't see the pieces of his life that were quietly stepping out of the door behind him. The more Amir gained, the emptier his world seemed to sound. His house had grown along with his fortune. A courtyard, multiple rooms, high ceilings, marble floors that echoed with every step. Once those echoes had been buried under laughter, music, arguments over little things. Now, they were just echoes. He returned home one evening with an award in his hand, a plaque engraved with his name for
Outstanding Contribution to Commerce.
He unlocked the front door and stepped into silence. No one called out a greeting. No one peeked around a corner. He placed the award on a shelf already crowded with similar honors and noticed something else missing. a picture frame, a stack of children's shoes by the door, a favorite jacket that used to hang on the back of a chair. In the kitchen, he found a note on the table. The words were simple, carefully written, not cruel.
We need more than your money.
Said,
We needed you, and you were never here. We can't keep living in a house full of your absence.
There was no anger on the page, just a kind of final sadness. He checked the bedrooms, closets, drawers. Some clothes remained, old furniture, things that could be replaced. The irreplaceable things, shared routines, conversations, everyday glances, were gone. He walked back to his office and unlocked his grandest treasure chest, staring into the glittering contents as if they might offer him advice. The coins were still coins, the jewels were still jewels. The deeds still represented everything he legally owned. But for the first time, he couldn't avoid a very simple question.
What exactly do I own if no one is here to share it?
The chest answered with silence. The storm arrived as a dark bruise on the horizon. At first, it was just wind, pushing papers against windows and rattling shutters in the market. Then came the rain, fast and heavy, turning dust to mud in minutes. From his office window, Amir watched as people below hurried to cover their stalls with tarps and cloth. Some of the older vendors struggled with poles and ropes, hands slipping. He thought about the goods that might be ruined, about the numbers he'd see tomorrow. Then something changed in the pattern of the rain. The drains clogged, water pooled. The usually gentle slope of the street became a shallow river, carrying crates, loose fruit, and broken baskets along with it. Lightning flashed. Somewhere nearby, a timber cracked loudly.
Sir, the lower market is flooding.
His assistant said, bursting into the office.
Stalls are collapsing. People are trying to save what they can.
I'll send money.
Amir replied, already reaching for a ledger.
We can compensate for lost stock. We can...
It's not just the stock.
His assistant interrupted.
They're helping each other right now. Moving families, lifting people out. They need hands, not ledgers.
For a moment, the old reflex fought back.
I'll call the officials, hire workers, purchase supplies.
Amir insisted. His assistant just looked at him.
You can do that later,
they said.
Right now, they're doing what they can with what they have.
The office suddenly felt too small, too high above everything that mattered. Amir grabbed his cloak and headed down. In the flooded market, the scene was chaos, but not the kind he was used to. Stalls had collapsed, their goods floating or spoiled. Children were being carried to higher ground. Neighbors were wading through knee-deep water, holding on to each other to keep from falling. He saw a woman he recognized, a spice vendor who had been there since his childhood, passing sacks of dry grain from a high shelf to a younger couple with small children.
That's everything you have left.
Amir heard someone say. She shook her head.
It's enough.
She answered.
I can buy more later. They need to eat today.
No contract, no interest, no guarantee of return. Just a quiet, instinctive generosity he had spent his life ignoring. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words stuck. What could he offer in that moment? He couldn't buy back the years he'd been absent. He couldn't purchase the kind of trust that made people run toward each other in a crisis instead of away. His wealth sat dry and safe in his chest. Their wealth stood ankle-deep in cold water, holding on to each other. For the first time in a long time, Amir felt something other than pride or fear. He felt very, very poor. Hours later, when the rain had finally tired itself out, Amir returned to his office dripping and exhausted. He had done what he could in the moment, lifting crates, carrying children, offering his building as a shelter. It had helped, but it hadn't erased anything. He toweled his hands dry and walked back to the ornate chest at the center of his desk. He opened it again. The coins were untouched, safe from the flood. The jewels still glimmered, indifferent to the storm. The deeds to shops and properties lay intact, dry and official. But as he looked at them now, the room felt wrong, like someone had changed the meaning of his whole life while he wasn't looking. He reached in and grabbed a handful of coins, letting them fall back into the pile. They clinked and chimed in a way he had once found comforting. Tonight, the sound felt cold and hollow, like rain on an empty roof. He thought of all the nights he had chosen to be here instead of at a bedside, a performance, a small kitchen table. All the times he'd said, "I'm doing this for you," while never stopping to ask if this was what you had ever asked for. He imagined showing this chest to the people he'd driven away and asking them what it was worth. To a child who had walked onto a stage and scanned an empty seat. To a spouse who had set one less plate at dinner for months. To an employee who had given years of loyalty and received only numbers in return. What would they see? Not security, not pride, just proof of every moment he'd chosen, again and again, to fill this box instead of their lives. For the first time, the treasure did not look full. It looked empty, empty of meaning, empty of stories worth telling, empty of anyone to share it with. He closed his eyes, and an unexpected thought rose, uninvited.
If I died tonight, who would sit around this chest and speak my name with love?
The question pressed on his chest harder than any weight of gold ever had. The next morning, the city woke to gray skies and muddy streets. Amir woke to a decision. He dressed more simply than usual, leaving the jeweled rings and embroidered cloak on the stand. Instead of calling for his assistant, he walked alone to the center of the room and placed both hands on the treasure chest. It was heavy again, but this time, he did not feel stronger for lifting it. He felt responsible for where it would go. With effort, he pushed and dragged it out of his office, down the polished stairs, and into the street. People stared as he passed. The great merchant, moving his own chest? What new land had he decided to conquer? He did not go toward the bank, or the officials' hall, or the wealthy quarter. He went back to the market. The flood had left its mark. Mud stained the stone. Some stalls tilted at odd angles. Wood soaked in dirty water lay scattered like fallen soldiers. But there were also signs of life. Neighbors sharing tools, children as they helped carry planks, smells of food being cooked for more than one family at a time. Amir stopped at the center of the square and opened the chest in front of everyone. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. He reached in, took out several handfuls of coins, and walked to the old spice vendor whose generosity he had witnessed in the storm.
I saw what you gave yesterday,
he said quietly.
I'd like to make sure you can refill your stall.
He pressed the coins into her hands. She looked from the money to his face, searching for the trick.
What do you want in return?
She asked. He swallowed.
Nothing,
he said, surprising himself with how strange the word tasted.
Nothing but a chance to do something right for once.
He moved on, to a carpenter whose stall had collapsed completely, to a young couple whose small shop had been their only source of income, to the families whose homes at the edge of the market had taken on water. Each time, he gave more than made sense for a man who measured everything in percentages. Each time, he had to fight the old fear that he was being irresponsible, that he was weakening his position. Yet with every coin that left the chest, he felt something shift inside him. The box grew lighter. His shoulders, somehow, did too. Some people refused at first. Some took the money with shaking hands. Some only accepted after he picked up a hammer or broom and worked beside them, proving this wasn't a performance. He stayed there all day, not as the untouchable owner of half the city, but as one more pair of hands in the mud. For the first time anyone could remember, Amir's wealth wasn't something that separated him from the market. It was something that bound him to it. When the sun finally began to sink, painting the puddles with streaks of gold, Amir realized there was one more place he needed to go. The path to that door felt longer than any walk he'd taken across the city. He left the chest in his office, this time unlocked, the lid resting loosely on its hinges. In his hand, he carried something smaller, a worn key, a folded document, and a small, simple box. He knocked on the familiar door of a modest home, the one he had avoided for far too long. It opened slowly. The face on the other side was older than in his memory, care lines deeper around the eyes, but unmistakably his own child. They looked at him with a mixture of surprise and caution.
Hello,
Amir said, voice quieter than he planned.
I wasn't sure you'd open.
They stepped back just enough to let him inside. The room was simple but warm, full of signs of a life that had grown without him. Books on a table, a jacket on a chair, photos on the wall that did not include his face. He looked around, then down at his hands.
I've spent my life filling boxes,
he began, the confession heavy and unfamiliar.
Chests, vaults, shelves with numbers on them. I told myself I was doing it for us. But when the flood came yesterday, I saw something I hadn't seen before.
His child said nothing, letting him speak.
For all the gold I've gathered,
he continued,
no one looked to me when they needed comfort. They looked to each other, to the ones who had been there day after day, with empty hands, but full hearts.
He placed the small box and folded paper on the table.
I can't buy back the nights I missed,
he said.
I can't pay off the pain I caused by choosing ledgers over lives. But I can choose differently now, if you're willing to let me try.
He pushed the paper toward them.
These are the papers to part of the business,
he explained.
I want you to have a say in what it becomes, not just for profit, but for people, For the city, for the ones that I stepped over on my way up.
His child stared at the documents, then at the worn lines on his face.
I don't want your money,
They said honestly.
I wanted you.
He nodded, eyes burning.
I know,
He replied.
and I'm not asking you to forgive me because of what's on that paper. I'm asking to start again, this time with my time, not just my treasure.
Silence stretched between them, not as an enemy, but as a space waiting to be filled. Finally, they reached out and placed their hand over his on the table. We can talk, they said. We can see. It wasn't a full embrace. It wasn't a perfectly restored picture, but it was a door cracked open. And for a man who had spent his life closing doors with locks and keys, that small opening felt like the richest thing he had ever received.
Months passed. The market found its rhythm again, this time with a slightly different sound. People still haggled and bargained, stalls still rose and fell, but now, in the midst of the bustle, you could often find Amir not in his high office, but on the ground, sleeves rolled up, listening more than he spoke. His business still existed. He still had chests and accounts and records, but if you walked into his office now, the grand treasure chest no longer sat like a throne in the center of the room. It rested off to one side, partly open. Inside, there were still coins and jewels and papers, but they no longer crowded the space. Alongside them lay other things: a child's drawing of a market stall with two figures side by side, a worn spice pouch from the vendor he'd helped, a simple bracelet made by a group of apprentices he'd sponsored, a folded letter with "Thank you" written in careful handwriting, a small photo of a dinner table crowded with faces, his among them this time. When visitors came to talk business, he sometimes noticed their eyes drift to those unexpected items.
What are these?
They would ask.
Reminders
He'd answer.
that I'm richer now than when this chest was full of nothing but metal.
In the evenings, he often locked up his office while there was still light in the sky. Instead of staying to watch numbers move on a page, he walked toward the places where people waited for him in ways no ledger ever had, toward family, toward shared meals, toward conversations with no profit and no price. He still earned, he still spent, but he no longer believed that everything of value could be owned. Amir spent most of his life chasing a kind of wealth that could be counted, stacked, and hidden in boxes. He thought that if he filled enough chests, his heart would finally feel full too. He only discovered at the end of that long road that a chest heavy with gold can still feel empty when the chairs around your table are bare. True treasure, he learned, is not measured in what you keep locked away, but in what you freely give, in the hands you hold when the floodwaters rise, in the names that are glad to see you walk through the door with nothing but your presence. Coins lose their shine, jewels lose their fashion, contracts lose their power as the years pass, but a life invested in kindness, in time, in listening, in loving, that kind of wealth does not rust or rot. One day, every chest we've filled will close for the last time. The only real question is, when that lid finally shuts, will what you've stored inside still matter to anyone but you? Moral: true wealth isn't what you keep, it's what you give. The richest life isn't the one full of treasure, it's the one full of people grateful you were there. Every story leaves a lesson and leaves us with a choice. Be kinder, stronger, wiser. If today's story stayed with you, there's another waiting to inspire you. Subscribe to Motivating Morals, where every story leaves a lesson, and every lesson has the power to change a life. Until our next story, keep choosing wisdom,